So we're just going to talk about editor config files today and how we can use them to switch to C# 10 more easily and use certain .NET features as well, and clean up our code, generally speaking, make it look consistent, and do it easily without any sort of friction. So I run a project called editor config, funnily enough. Here it is over here on GitHub. And what is an editor config file? Well, it's an open standard. Where is the link? Here we go. It's an open standard file format. So here's an example of an editor config file, and it allows you to set certain settings for your code, and it supports any language, Java, Python, C#, whatever. And it allows you to do things like set the line endings, the char set, the indent size, for different file types as well. So you can do YAML files and JSON files. I want them to be indented by 2 spaces and so on. Excuse me. Microsoft took this a bit further, and they added support for C# and .NET and other .NET languages like F# as well. And they added some custom settings, and I decided to create an editor config file, a default one that has a bunch of stuff pre-configured in it. So I have the basic stuff that I showed you earlier in the editorconfig.org website, but I also have settings for .NET in general. So that's any .NET language, VB and C#, but also C# itself has some specific code style rules, C# style rules, and we also have some formatting rules. There's a lot here, as you can see. There's a lot here. The rules in editor config are pretty exhaustive. So what Microsoft has done actually is they've taken all the rules in Visual Studio that were hard coded in Visual Studio in the Tools Options menu. So if you go to Tools Options, I think it's Text Editor, C#, Code Style. All of these rules have been in Visual Studio for a very long time. They've been added to over the years, but they've taken these rules and turned them into, made them configurable in the editor config file. So that's so that you can use them in not just Visual Studio, but in Visual Studio Code or any other editor. So that's the idea. Now, I noticed some new rules were added as part of the .NET 6 upgrade. And if we go to Visual Studio again, I have a project here. It doesn't matter what solution it is, you can ignore that. I've stuck my editor config file into this solution. If I open it with, if you double click it, you get this editor, but you can right click, open with source code text editor, and you can see the same file that I showed you earlier. So this is the actual rules that are powering this editor file over here. And I noticed that this contained some new rules that I hadn't configured before and I'd never seen before. By the way, I'm using Visual Studio 2022, which is currently in preview 6. I just updated it this morning before I had preview 5 installed. Now preview 6, Visual Studio 2022 adds this editor file for editor config files. If you have Visual Studio 2019, you won't see this as far as I know. And I was playing around with this earlier. I found it to be pretty buggy, so I hadn't used it. Visual Studio 2022 is still in preview, so that kind of makes sense. However, when you go in here and you look on this location column over here, you can see that there are certain rules that have not been configured, or you can see the location of where these rules are coming from. So most of them come from my editorconfig file that I've set up. However, there are some rules like this one and this one that are being set by Visual Studio. Now, in this particular case, the tab size 4, I use spaces as opposed to tabs. So I guess this doesn't matter what this is set to, because excuse me, we're not using tabs. And this guy over here is Visual Studio saying use /r/n for the carriage return line feed character or characters instead of /n. And the reason for that is I'm on Windows 11 in fact, and Windows 11 should use /r/n, and if you're on Linux you should use /n. Not sure why there's 2 slashes there. I think that's a bug. And I'm also not sure why there's a /r on its own. I don't know why anyone would want to set that to that value. So normally in Git, you have a git ignore, git attributes file, and I normally set this setting on every single Git repo I have. What this does is it normalizes line endings. So what does that mean? If I clone this repo on Windows, it will change all the line endings to /r/n. If I clone this repo on a Linux machine or a Mac OS machine, it will switch the line endings to /n on its own. So that's the purpose of this. It's really important to have this if you're going to have people working on Linux and Windows at the same time. Highly recommend that you always add this setting to every one of your repos that is exposed publicly. And you know, if you have a repo exposed publicly, you don't know who's going to use who's going to contribute to it or use that code. So I think it's definitely worth taking a look and adding that setting in there just to make people's life easier. Other settings that's worth mentioning in here actually is that there are certain files which require the use of crlf or /r/n, and those are command.cmd and .bat files. Those are of course Windows specific file formats. So we have to kind of use this syntax over here to just ensure that those are crlf instead of just lf. And there's a similar case on Linux as well. So .sh files on Linux are required to be .lf, lf, so i.e. /n line ending. So important to have this here. So having this section, well worth sticking this into your repos. And then down here, if you're interested, I have a section on git lfs. So if you have any binary files like images, PNGs, JPEGs, various kind of different binary files, if you check those into Git, it's not a good idea, because every time you make a change to that file, it will take a copy of that file and stick it into your Git repo, and your Git repo just gets bigger and bigger and bigger and just kind of bloats and gets really big. Whereas if you use git lfs, you'll find that it will take your binary files and stick them into a separate hive called the large file system, git lfs, and then you will have a single copy separate from your Git repo. You'll get a nice small Git repo, and all your binary files will be in a separate hive. So that will mean that you will not bloat your repo, and it will be quicker to clone as well. Okay, let's dig into the editor config file again. Let's switch to code style. So there's a few new code style settings that I noticed. There's one here, prefer system.hashcode in get hashcode. So it looks like if this is currently set to a suggestion. So if let's create a new class in here as an example. And then try to implement get hash code. What happens in here? So let's just return 0 for now. We don't need any of these namespaces. We're not going to document that for now. Hash code. Let's see. Do I get a suggestion for that? It doesn't look like it, does it? Maybe I need to build it. Let's turn that into an expression bodied member. Could be that this other warning is complaining about this. We'll just document it as well. Some nice documentation. I don't see any suggestions coming up, so I'm not sure that setting is actually having any effect. Let's try now setting this in setting it to a warning. I think if I set it to a warning, will that edit my editor config file? No. How do you actually change this setting? So it looks like it's updating Visual Studio maybe. Let's just set that back to how it was. Maybe if I go to my over here to my Visual Studio options and search for get hash code. No. Hash code? Nope. Expression level preferences. Maybe I just need to search for it. They should really include a search over here. Otherwise it's really hard to find these settings. I don't see that setting in here. Here it is. Prefer system.hashcode in get hashcode. These are undocumented settings, by the way. I should have mentioned. If you go to my editor config file, there is documentation that I've linked to for all of the different types of settings. So, for example, there's a link here, and you can go and read about all of the different settings. There's so many. You will not find these ones documented. I don't know when they will be documented. At some point, I hope they will. It has taken some time in the past, I've noticed. So this is currently a suggestion, and let's change that to a warning. So it would prefer us to use this rather than generating our own hash code implementation. That's not going to change the my editor config file that I have in the solution though. That's not great. But if I hit this generate editor config from settings file, editor config 2, let's see what that has generated for us. So let's stick that over here. Wow, that's a lot of settings. I have no idea what this setting is called. So we have to kind of search for it. What is it called in Visual Studio again? Prefer system.hashcode in get hashcode. Warning. I'm surprised they can't find the word hash in here. Expression level preferences. That's the area where it adds it, isn't it? Code block preferences. Okay, that's interesting. So the options puts it under code block preferences, but the UI, this guy, puts it under expression level preferences. Code block preferences, use simple. Oh, it hasn't added it at all. That's interesting. So another way to find this setting is to go over to the Roslyn repo and search for what. So there are some issues raised over here, and here it is. So let's have a look at this setting. So yeah, so this is a code fix. They have a code fix as well, which is nice. So just need to figure out how to actually add this setting now. And that's the amazing thing. So an editor config file is not just about code style. It actually forces the use of certain new C# 10 features. If you look at my editor config file, you'll find that I have enabled certain C# 9, 8, and 7 features by default. So if you write some code in an old-fashioned way using C#, and that's very easy to do because there's so many different ways of doing things now in C# because it's grown to be such an old language now. It's been around for a while. Then is that the name of the setting? Get hash code implementation can be simplified. Nope. Just trying to search for the setting name here. Unfortunately for some of these new settings that are undocumented, this is the best way to find how to set them. Just going hunting around in the Roslyn repo. This is where the setting is actually coded up in the Roslyn compiler, because these are compiler generated, compiler enforced settings. Where is the setting name? I can't find it. I didn't spot it there. Maybe in one of these other issues. Oh, is not supported in editor config file. Okay, so perhaps this particular setting is not currently supported. I'm going to subscribe to this issue over here. Well, unfortunately, no editor config file rule exists. A workaround for this issue would be to include the following line in the editor config file. Okay, so we can set this particular thing as a workaround. We recognize that the disconnect between tools options is an issue. Our goal is to eventually create a more uniform and seamless experience between the two. So I'm going to check out those issues later, but let's take this editor config change. And for now, I'm just going to stick it at the bottom, and we'll just say warning. This must be the IDE rule, the rule ID for this particular rule. And normally when you change the rules, change the editor config files, you have to close the file and reopen it for it to get enforced. I'm just going to add a comment here so that we get rid of that horrible error. fix formatting. Oops. So example is an internal class. We've got some other errors around here, but not the new warning. Do I need to restart Visual Studio to get it? Let's give that a go. It could well be because this is a Visual Studio setting and not an edit config setting. It could be that you need to restart Visual Studio to see this effect. What is this? Is inherited. Am I going to see it now? Just build that project. That's built. I still don't see a warning. So yeah, was that person fibbing? I don't see. So I tried adding this to my .config file and it didn't seem to work. So let's just leave a comment there for these guys at Microsoft to just get back to us on. But there's other settings as well that we can look at. So let's move on. That was one that was more .NET focused. So that one, there's a whole section down here of new settings. And if we go to analyzers, it looks like there are other settings here from third parties like XUnit. Remove unnecessary imports, fixable. Analyzer defaults. So there's lots of kind of FXCOP, or it used to be called FXCOP rules here. These ones that begin with CA. The ones that begin with IDE, I think, are the editor config ones as well. Not sure why they show up here. Maybe these also show up in code style. I'm not sure. So let's go back to code style and have a look at these ones. Allow multiple blank lines. Do we want to allow multiple blank lines? No. We'll set that to warning. If I save that, has it updated my editor config file? It has indeed. So that's a new setting. It says experimental. That's interesting. That's an experimental setting. It's not yet released. Allow statement immediately after block. I'm not sure what that means. Is this also available in our options over here? Code style. This is under new line preferences. So let's go down to new line preferences somewhere. New line preferences. Here we go. It's probably easier if I have a look here. So this allows multiple blank lines. If I set that to no, you require that setting. So there's a refactoring here as well. That's good. If you have if you're adding an editor config file to your solution, one really great thing is that a lot of the rules have refactorings or code fixes there for you. So you just need to do control dot and then apply that rule in the menu to the whole solution as opposed to just the current line of code. Or you can do it to the current document also. So it's really easy to add an editor config file to a solution and automatically just fix up the code to make it look exactly as you want in your rules. So let's go back to that setting over here. Let's have a look at this next one. Allow embedded statements on the same line. So yes is allowed by default. No. I'm going to go with no because I think it looks more confusing in this syntax over here. Allow blank lines between consecutive braces. So there's a yes there. I'll go with no. Allow statement immediately after block. So typically there's a thing called stylecop.analyzers if you haven't come across it. Oh. Stylecop. No, not that one. Stylecop analyzers. This project over here. This adds some additional rules around code style to your project. And I use this. I started using it many years ago. And it's a bit, shall we say, controversial. I wrote a blog post many years ago called Stop the Brace Wars, Use Stylecop. And basically, I think most of us who've worked in large teams have had a meeting where they talk about code style. And we talk about, okay, are you using this dot for your variables or are you using underscore? You know, things like that. And how should your code look? And because every developer is different, everybody's going to write code in a different way. And there's a certain cost attached to that. So if everybody's code looks different, then if you're reading somebody else's code that you're not used to, your brain is going to take a few extra seconds to parse that code because it's not used to that particular syntax or way of or code style. So if everybody was using the same style, then potentially you'd save yourself those few seconds, or at least that's what I think about this particular subject. Some people don't like mandating a particular code style. That's fine, whatever makes you happy. I personally think it's useful because I've been in meetings in the past where people want to impose a certain code style, and those meetings drag on. They're not fun to be in. So there are tools in other platforms, like if you write JavaScript, there's a really amazing tool called Prettier. Prettier, that is an opinionated code formatter that will format your code automatically. So you could write code like this and it will automatically change it to this and save it to your file. As soon as you hit the save button, it will automatically format that and save it. So you never need to think about code style ever again. I really wish that C# had something similar to this. I really wish that we could set a default set of settings, a bit like this on the left here. These are the settings used by Prettier. There's not very many, and that's on purpose because you don't want to get into the weeds with your settings. And I really wish we had something very similar because I don't want to mess around with code style. When I'm writing code, I just want to write some code and have it automatically formatted for me. And that's what an editor config file kind of promises to do, although it's a little bit more manual because you have to apply a fix after the fact. So anyway, Stylecop is a great tool. It's an analyzer. It's just a NuGet package you add to your project, and It adds some additional code style rules, and I make my particular editor config file conform to the style cop rules for look and feel, because there is a little bit of overlap. For example, the style cop project enforces that you have a space after this end and the next line of code, and that's what I'm going to go with in this particular case, just to conform with that. In this next one here, allow blank line after colon in constructor initializer. What does that do? So this allows you to move this section down here. As far as I know, I've always used this particular syntax, and I think that's what StyleCop also requires you to do. Let's quickly just check that. Let's generate an editor config file as well, so we can grab those rules. And let's change them to warnings as well, actually, so we can pick them out. Okay, so then let's go and play with our example class that we created earlier. And what was that rule I was going to look at? Oh, so let's create a constructor. So if I do put constructor initializers on their own line, so that's a style cop rule right there. You can see if I hit control dot, SA is style cop analyzer rule, and if I make that fix, you can, so like I talked about earlier, you can make the fix in the current document, in the current project, or even in the whole solution. So very useful there. Or you can just click this and it will do it in this particular line of code. So that's a rule in this particular file. Let's see what this thing has done. So where's my experimental rules here? New line preferences. It's only saved 2 of them. That's interesting. Allow multiple blank lines. Allow statement immediately after block. So why hasn't it done all of them? Where are these? Allow multiple blank lines. Yes. So that's coming from my file now. We'll copy these 2. Add it to our editor config file as well. I like to edit the source directly. What's happened there? Copy, paste. Do I need to reload this? So where are these settings coming from now? Okay, so I got 2 settings now coming from my editor config file. Allow embedded statement on the same line. I can't remember what I set as my options. Yes, 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 yes to all of them. Oh, no. 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 It was no to all of them. Okay. So we want no, 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 and no. And we want warning, warning, warning. If I save that, what will happen? So it's added one setting up here. and the rest down here. Has it done this correctly? Let me clear this. Open that again. Is this even right? No, it hasn't. Yeah, it's got the wrong settings. It's stuck a yes in there. Let me just edit it by hand. So false, 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 and false. I assume that was the equivalent of no. Let's just save that. Edit that. Open that again. It looks like this is still buggy, this editor. I wouldn't recommend using it. So now all my settings are coming from my editor config file. If we go and open it in our text editor again, are they all experimental? They are indeed. So these are all experimental rules that you can set. And then you have this one for get hash code as well. So I probably wouldn't recommend using these just yet. Until they're no longer experimental, because they could cause issues in your repo. All of these rules, I think, are also duplicated in style cop analyzers. So it might be worth using those instead if you want these particular rules. And then there's one other rule it's worth talking about that I've already set. There's this thing here called file scoped C# style namespace declarations. So you may have noticed that my namespace is a single line of code instead of having brackets like these and having my class indented. And that's because this particular setting is set to file scoped, and it gives me this particular code fix which says get rid of these brackets and unindent the content, and that's a new C#10 feature. So you can literally add this line of code to your editor config file, come over here and go, I want to do that in my whole solution, and then that's a super quick way of applying that code fix to your entire solution. Imagine having to do that manually. It's not very fun. So just do that. Now we have that C#10 feature applied everywhere. It turns out that there's not very many. That's undocumented, by the way. So you won't find that on the documentation for the editor config file, as far as I know. So if I search for file, yeah, totally can't even search for file scoped. What's that setting named? C# style namespace declarations. Doesn't exist. So super useful hidden setting there for you. What's the time? We're 40 minutes into the stream. Let's wrap up by raising an issue on my editor config set repo. There are new settings in Visual Studio 16.10, 16.11. Oh, maybe I've already spotted these elsewhere. Yeah. These experimental settings. Turns out I already knew about them and I had forgot about them. Interesting. So these are still experimental. I wouldn't recommend using them. And I should probably write the fact that I want to use false here. Set them as a warning. So these are new settings that I wanted to add to my editor config file in this repo. for people to use, but it looks like they're just still experimental. Hopefully they will be released soon. So that's the PR when they were added to the Roslyn repo. There was also that other setting. Let's quickly stick that in here as well. Where did it go? Here it is. So there is also that one. I think there's a new feature in GitHub. If you just add a dash in front of your link to an issue, it prints it out like this, which is really nice. It gives you the title and the number. So there is also a new setting to require the use of hash code. If you don't know what system.hashcode is, by the way, I wrote a blog post on get hashcode made easy. And get hashcode is used in dictionary types so that you can bucket different items in your collection together. And that's the way kind of a dictionary works, a dictionary collection. And typically you'd have to write a function that looks a bit like this for get hashcode. Totally unintelligible. So I wrote this helper class called hashcode. It's kind of popular. People have asked me about licensing it. This is all MIT licensed if you want to use it, and turns that unintelligible code into this really simple code to generate a hash code. So there's some properties or fields in this particular class, and you can just use of and each in this kind of fluent syntax and generate get hash code that way. And then later on, .NET Core came along and they came up with this new hash code type, system.hashcode. And it's not as nice as my particular API, but you can generate a hash code using this syntax or this particular syntax over here. And then I also have in Stack Overflow, there's a question that somebody asked years and years and years ago. What's the best algorithm for overriding get hashcode? 1,500 upvotes. And the top answer is this unintelligible stuff over here. This was the right answer many years ago, but no longer. I think that was written by John Skeet many years ago. We should really get an updated answer. So I did that. If you scroll down and down and down, eventually you get to my answer, which is to either use the system.hashcode that I showed you earlier, or the get hashcode made easy code that I wrote. And right now, and then I talk about, you know, what makes a good hashcode algorithm as well. And this is the problem with Stack Overflow. My answer, which is the more correct answer, is currently stood at 93 upvotes. And the next answer is more of the old school, like random magic numbers and unchecked code and God knows what. The next one up is to use value tuple, which is a bit nicer, but is not as fast. A get hash code implementation has to be fast, and it also doesn't cover some edge cases. And that's 492 upvotes. I don't think my answer is ever going to hit that. And then the number one answer has 1,700 upvotes. Really, Stack Overflow should have a way of saying, you know, this particular answer is now outdated and de-emphasize it somehow, but I don't think that's gonna ever happen. So if you get to this question, please do go and give this one an upvote. And I don't say that just to get some more points. I think I have enough points as it is. It's more to just get the right answer onto the page. So do check that out. Cool. So that's editor config files. Let's briefly look at some of the C#9 features that were added and you might find useful. So for example, I can't remember what C#9 added. I might be able to find out by looking at closed issues. Oh yeah, no, that's not the one. Here we go. Here's some new settings that were added in my editor config file some time back. So prefer simple using statements. So instead of saying, for example, using, var file stream or memory stream equals new memory stream. Instead of doing that, you can just say, you can just lose that and do that. And then now when this end of the block is hit, this stream will get disposed for you. So that's a cool feature. What else? Prefer static local functions. That's a nice one. So let's have an example of that. So if I, for example, I don't know, wanted some helper function inside, and I wanted to call said helper function, I could do that. Just to add some code in here. So there's my helper function within my constructor, and I have a line of code, a code fix here to make this a static local function. That helps with performance a fair bit, so definitely worth adding the static keyword there. Of course, if I was using a variable in here, int I equals 0, for example, and then if I did that, I would not be able to make that static, and that would not suggest that it make it static, because now I'd have to pass in I, so I'd have to go int I and pass it in like that, and then pass that in here. Then I could make it static. C# using directive placement. Okay, so this one used to be the case that if you had the old style namespace declarations like this, normally using statements are placed above the namespace, but there was some obscure reason why placing it inside the namespace is actually better. I can't remember what that particular reason was off the top of my head, but style cop analyzers also suggest doing this. So that's another area where editor config and style cop analyzers kind of overlapped. So I went with that setting as the default. Roslyn also updated, in particular we have this rule, but I'm not sure if this rule covers this scenario. Okay, so this is around, how do you want to name the local functions, so is that okay? Having a lowercase h there, that's kind of Java style naming scheme. Also .NET operator placement when wrapping. Okay, so this one, I think .NET operator placement when wrapping. If I search for that one, I'll find more information about it, I hope. Nope, that was one of the settings that was not documented. Yeah, so there's loads of settings that are not documented, and I'm in this repo, the Microsoft Docs, Visual Studio Docs repo, pushing for them to be documented. So unfortunately that one is not. Let's just check what I have set it to in here. End of line, and undocumented section. I can't remember what this setting was. What is it? If I look in the Roslyn repo, I'll probably be able to find out. But yeah, those are some C# 9 features that you can enable in using editorconfig, and then just hit Control dot, apply it to your whole solution, and you've got a nice PR that upgrades your entire solution over to C# 9 or C# 10 in this case. So these new settings that I've added, since they're experimental, I don't want to add them. But, and this one here doesn't seem to work with editorconfig. So it looks like, and I already updated the file scoped namespaces. This guy over here, namespace declarations, file scoped or block scoped. So I have, if you go over to my editorconfig project, do have a look, check it out. You can always change the rules to whatever you want. People use this thing. Some people have had a look at it. I do regular releases whenever there's new versions of C# or .NET. The last version, version 4, added the file scoped namespace declarations. I was going to add those experimental settings today, but I'm not sure I should. I should probably wait for them to not be experimental anymore. So yeah, we are at time. So thanks everyone for watching. If you do like and subscribe, it does help with the channel, and hopefully we'll get some more views out there and get the .NET community a bit more noticed, I think, because the JavaScript community is pretty big. I think they're quite vocal. I think we need to be vocal as well. So this is part of that effort, I guess. So thanks everyone for watching. Do ping me on Twitter as well if you do have any questions or anything like that. Cheers.